Hello, I am Remo Yes Man, and today I want to talk about pay to skip story in Warframe because pay to skip story is a system that DE is thinking about implementing, and I've seen a lot of discourse online about it. And the immediate reaction from the player base was extremely negative when they saw this. But I want to go ahead and throw my 2 cents in because I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think there's good aspects to this and bad aspects, but I don't necessarily think it's an outright bad thing, and it could be good to put money in the pocket of digital extremes. Now, let me elaborate. Now, basically, what pay to skip story would entail is you would complete the tutorial, and I believe you also have to complete Vor's Prize, but I consider Vor's Prize part of the tutorial. And upon completion of the tutorial, you will be given an option to proceed for free, or you will be given an option to pay platinum in order to skip the story. And to be honest, that does sound a little ghetto, but it's not necessarily out of line in what you see in a lot of other MMO type games. Now, when you look at other MMOs in the industry, and listen, I know Warframe is not necessarily an MMO, but the way it is being handled is kind of like an MMO, so we're just going to use the MMO framework. When you look at other MMOs in the industry, other MMO type games have a system where you can usually pay to skip the story. Now, when you pay to skip the story in these games, you're usually not just paying to skip the story, you're basically paying for a maxed out character. Any MMO type game that allows you to pay to skip the story will give you a maxed out character, and they'll usually offer you a full page of gear to kit out every slot on that character. Now, the reason they do this is because you're paying to skip the story, so they want to immediately fulfill that power fantasy. Other games that do this don't necessarily expect you to stick around, and then on top of that, they're just digital items, so they don't give a damn about tossing you a fuck ton of digital goods. So considering all those factors, one has to wonder how DE would handle pay to skip story, because when you look at Warframe as a whole, Warframe is a pretty complicated game, and if you're paying to skip the story in Warframe, I don't think DE is gonna just throw you out there butt naked, you know? I don't think they're gonna just throw a mastery rank 0 out onto the star chart with all the planets available and no legitimate weapons to defend themselves. So it makes me wonder, if they implement pay to skip story, then what are they gonna get, you know? What are they gonna get? Are they gonna throw you a bit of mastery? Are they gonna throw you like a mandatory like mastery rank 12 boost? Because you have to think, a boost to mastery rank 12 would make sense. And if they're just throwing out free mastery, I'm not necessarily sure if I'm okay with that, but I don't know. This is just speculation, you know? You would have to wonder, what is DE gonna give the player that pays to skip the story? Now, another reason why pay to skip the story may not be a bad thing is because since Warframe is an MMO type game, there is a whole community of MMO YouTubers that don't necessarily cover Warframe, but they still jump into the game every now and then because it falls into that MMO type genre. And when a lot of these guys end up trying out Warframe, they end up liking the game a lot. A lot of these MMO type YouTubers are the main ones that can benefit from paying to skip the story. And if these MMO YouTubers are showcasing the game, that's actually good for the health of Warframe, because ultimately, it will bring in new players. Now, the other side of the coin is a lot of those new players that are coming into the game to try it out because they're watching their favorite MMO content creator play the game. They might follow suit and end up paying to skip the story just like their favorite MMO content creator did, especially if DE is offering you some pretty decent gear, or what seems to be some pretty decent gear in their eyes, not knowing that you might have to put a decent build on that gear for it to even make a difference. And ultimately what's going to happen to these players is they're not going to stick with the game because they fell into the trap of paying to skip all the content, and they don't actually realize that Warframe is not necessarily about the destination, but the journey and all the hardships you went through in order to get to the destination. So when these players do pay to skip the story, they're going to be on the star chart getting their ass whooped and probably getting outplayed by mastery rank 8s and 9s that did take their time to learn all the lessons they needed to learn in order to be playing Warframe. And that's okay because Warframe is not a competitive game, you know, so it's okay to get your ass whooped by people that are lower MRs than you. You know, it might hurt your pride, but it's okay because Warframe is like the least competitive game ever. And therein lies another reason why I think pay to skip the story isn't necessarily a bad thing, because Warframe is not a competitive game. Warframe is like the least competitive game ever, but there are some dipshits in the community that play the game as if it was competitive, right? Warframe is not competitive, so if you have to carry another jackass through a mission because they don't know what the fuck they're doing, hey, it's not like it's something you haven't done 100 times before. Now, another reason why pay to skip story isn't necessarily a bad thing is because you may simply have veteran players from other platforms that want to switch over, but they don't want to go through the grind of the story once again. I myself am a veteran player, and for the longest time I was planning to transition to PC because originally my account was on PS4, right? I started off on PS4, but at the same time, what stopped me from transitioning was the fact that we didn't have cross-save progression, and I didn't want to start over. Because as a veteran player, it's like, you know, do you really want to grind for all your favorite Warframes again? Do you really want to grind for all the cosmetics that go along with those Warframes and all the necessary mods to put a particular build on that Warframe? And do you really want to go grind for all your arcanes again, especially at Arcane Energize? Like, that shit is just stuff that I don't care for doing again. Now listen, there's no guarantee that pay to skip story is coming to Warframe, but if I had to put money on it, I would say that we will eventually see it in game, because when you look at pay to skip the story, it's basically just free money for digital extremes. Now, despite what we as players know, DE does need to generate a certain amount of money, as DE is owned by, I believe it's Tencent or somebody owns DE. I believe it's Tencent, right? So considering the fact that Tencent owns DE, there are revenue projections that they need to hit. Now, in order to meet those revenue projections, DE usually relies on microtransactions, as Warframe is a free game. So considering the fact that Tencent owns DE, I'm guessing that's why we're starting to see a lot of new forms of monetization being put into Warframe. Now look, We just seen the Bungie team get Drax for a 45% revenue projection miss because Bungie is owned by Sony now. And yeah, I know Bungie claims that Sony had nothing to do with that, but I guarantee that if Bungie was not owned by Sony, there probably wouldn't have gotten hit as hard as they did. Now, a few things that do worry me is considering the fact that we might see pay to skip story implement, what is the player going to get for paying to skip the story? Because I'm fine with simply paying to skip story, but if we get to the point where we start giving out free mastery to accommodate people that pay to skip the story, I think that might be a problem. Then on top of that, players that pay to skip the story, what are they going to get in terms of resources? Because I doubt you can just let someone pay to skip the story and not give them any resources to build anything. I would imagine there would be like a set amount of resources that would be given to a player that pays to skip the story, like 50,000 of each basic resource, 10,000 of the more rare resources like plastid and polymer bundle, and 500 of the even rarer resources like Aroken cells and Neurodes. Like, what are you gonna give to them, you know? Because this is all just speculation on my part, but I doubt you can just give them nothing if they're dropping cash on it. Like, are we gonna see like two different forms of pay to skip story where there's like the basic tier where you can just pay like 30, 40, 50 bucks to skip the story, but then for extra 20 bucks, you'll get a prime skip, which will give you one prime set, which comes with one prime weapon, one prime secondary, one prime melee, one prime companion, and one prime Warframe to accommodate any player that skips the story. Like, what are you gonna give these guys? Because this is all just speculation on my part, but I'm just wondering, you know? One has to wonder, what is DE gonna give these players that pay to skip the story, you know? Because if they're giving you some pretty good gear and it's lucrative enough, I can see normal players trying to hop in on that shit if the option is available to them. Because to be honest with you guys, even as a veteran players, I still buy those new player starter pack bundles whenever I see them in the PlayStation store for like $7.99, where they're giving you like 75 plat. They're giving you a 3-day XP booster and a 3-day credit booster, as well as a fucking Sayandana that you already own. I still buy that shit. I'm like, I'm no new player, but I still want to get in on this shit. Anyway, guys, that's gonna be all from me. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it so much. What do you guys think about pay to skip story? Please sound off in the comments below. Now, the best thing you guys can do for me at this point is just to have a beautiful day. Peace.